When it comes to running adventures for our tabletop role-playing games, I like to dissect it into three different categories. We have the Sandbox, the Railroad, and the Rollercoaster. Now, the reason I dissect it into these three is because it provides a general outline, not only for my players, but for myself to follow. So without further ado, let's dive into them. First off, we have the Sandbox. Now, with a Sandbox style adventure, we're going to create a huge open place for our players to explore. This is going to be a nice little environment in our world that our players can explore around and have free reign. Now, the idea of the Sandbox is that we're going to add a whole bunch of adventure elements to the location. We're going to have monsters to fight. We're going to have places to explore. We're going to have people to talk with. We're going to have a whole bunch of things to get our players inspired, to follow what they want to do, to go where they want to go. Now, the biggest thing about a sandbox is that we don't want to make it linear. We want to present an open world, but at the same time, we want it to be a truly open world. At any point, our players should be able to point in any direction and go in that direction. Mind you, there is certain bounds. You're going to have a map and you say, hey, don't go beyond the map. But other than that, it should be free reign. Most important of all, though, is the story, or the lack thereof. Instead of it being a linear story that we write up, instead of it being a grandiose plot that we write in one singular fashion, we work with it. We work with what our players give us. Instead of having this one grandiose mega adventure a la all of the 5e adventure modules, we instead just create a nice little environment for our players to explore around in. Now, the ultimate sensation and reason why we make a sandbox-style adventure is because we want to allow for the freedom. It's because we want to sit there and show up to the table and say to our players, hey, this is your world, you get to explore, what do you wish to do? Sandboxes also work great for those styles of play where you show up to the table every single session and you get into a new adventure. Instead of it being just one grandiose plot that you cover over the course of a major campaign, you instead just go over many little one-shots, but using the same characters in the same environment. Sandboxes work extremely well for those players that love to just have that autonomy. It works well for the groups that want to go explore at their own pace and go to their own locations on their own time. Now, the second way to run adventures is the railroad. Now, I've heard a lot of people say, oh, railroading's bad, railroading's this, railroading's that. But the important thing to consider is there is a lot of people who do not want that autonomy of choosing anything at any time at any given place. There's a lot of people who want a structure. There's a lot of people who want to be guided along, and that is where the railroad comes in. With a railroad, we start off on a single junction, but our players are the ones that get to decide which railway they go down. Do they want to go down the A route, the B route, the C route? Maybe they make their own D route. Now, what are those routes? Maybe the A route is a form of diplomacy. Maybe the B route is combat. Maybe the C route is some sort of espionage. And you sort of lay these things out. But then you also allow for that autonomy for there to be a D route. You allow for your players to decide how they move the story along. Now, depending on the scenario, you could in fact be presenting a lot more of these options to your players. And the important thing is you lay these options out to your players. You say, hey, there is this obstacle in front of you. How are you going to proceed? Are you going to tackle it this way? Are you going to tackle it that way? And presenting these options to your players is going to be a great way to get them thinking. Okay, maybe we like this one option better. Maybe we like that one option better. Or, in the case that I see a lot, is some people somewhat meld the two. Maybe they like to choose two options and sort of try and thread the needle. Regardless of whether they choose options that you provide or they provide their own options, the idea of the railroad is that you're continuing to chug along. You are going forward. This is good for people that want a sense of progression. There is a lot of people who show up to the table and want to feel like they accomplished something. And running a railroad-style adventure where they are continuing to move forward and they either make their own options or you provide them options is a great way to go about it. Due to the creative freedom in our tabletop role-playing games, there is sometimes a lot of people that get overwhelmed with that creative freedom. There is a lot of people who simply can't comprehend the possibilities because they are essentially endless. So providing several key options for your players to choose from and allowing for them to have their own autonomy in choosing a direction to move forward in is great. Now, mind you, when I say move forward, it doesn't necessarily mean in the same direction. They could, in fact, be moving in opposite directions, but the idea is that they are moving forward throughout the course of the adventure. No matter what options they choose, no matter which way they actually go in, They need to feel like they've accomplished something. They need to feel like they're striving for a higher goal. And having a railroad is a great way to go about it. And now the third, and the most rigid of all the adventure styles, is the roller coaster. This is the one that I typically hear a lot of people say is the railroady style approach, but the roller coaster is truly the most rigid. This is where your players show up to the table and they sit down, they shut up, they buckle up, and you just slam the button and they go off on an adventure. They go to the pre-designed destinations. They show up to these locations at the time that you deem necessary. They show up and you are just guiding them along, and they have very little to no autonomy in where they go, what they do. Now that might sound off-putting to some people, but something to consider is typically that's how one-shots are run, right? You don't typically show up to a one-shot and it's a sandbox, because that wouldn't make any sense. You'd just be showing up and you can go in any direction, say anything, do anything, waste as much time as you want. That doesn't really make that much sense for one-shots. But for running a full-blown adventure, whether this be a few sessions or many, many sessions, a roller coaster may sound a little bit strange. But something to take away from this: you are ensuring the gameplay and maximizing the prep at the same time. You say to your players, hey, just show up and have a good time for whatever I send at you, and there you go. You get to prep exactly what the players are getting into, and your players are showing up and they don't have to think much of it. That can be an excellent way to go, depending on the type of players that you have. If we were to compare this to the railroad, this would be, instead of presenting them an A, B, and C option, this would just be they're on the A juncture and that's that end of story. Now, it's important to consider when you're doing a roller coaster style of adventure, you ensure that whenever they do have that creative choice, that they get to shine. When you send them into combat, you don't dictate where they stand, you don't dictate what spells they use, you don't do any of that. You allow them to absolutely shine. Depending on the types of players that you have, they may desire a roller coaster style adventure, but maybe you present them a little bit of the illusion of choice. Maybe you make them think that they get to choose where they're going, but in reality, you already know exactly what is about to happen. I find that running a roller coaster style adventure works really well for younger people and for people who simply just don't want to have to think about the hard decisions. People that just want to simply show up, hang out with their friends, and have a good time. And now that we've seen the three different styles of adventures, I'm curious about what you all have to think about that. What styles appeal to you the most? What styles do not appeal to you? I know a lot of people are going to say that roller coasters are way too restrictive, and I know some people are going to say sandboxes are so open that you can't get anything done. I know some people are going to say that railroads are in fact a sham. There is a lot of different ways people approach how they run their adventures, and I know that I only presented 3 here, but people may have their own ideas on how to run these adventures. Maybe people have their own ideas on what the sandbox means, what the railroad means, and what the roller coaster means. It's a very important topic to discuss about what style of adventure we are running at the table, because people are going to have different perceptions on what the adventure is all about. What do they think they can do? And most important of all, what do they think that they cannot do? What is the adventure at hand? Is it going to be a linear adventure? Is it going to be a non-linear adventure? Do your choices matter? Do your choices not matter? It's important to discuss these things because we all have different taste on what we want our adventures to be. Maybe you want a sandbox the whole time. Maybe you want a sandbox that transitions into a railroad and at the very end goes into a roller coaster. Maybe you want the opposite. Maybe you want it to be a roller coaster from the start and then opens up slowly over time. There's so many different ways on how you can run these adventures, but it's important that you get everybody on the table on the same page about what the adventure is about. So that way there's no confusion about what you're doing, what you're trying to do, and most important of all, as a DM, what you have to prep. So tell me down below what style of adventures you prefer playing in and prefer running, because I would love to hear it. But that's going to do it for me. Thank you for watching, thanks for listening, and thank you to my amazing patrons. You guys are absolutely incredible. Thank you so very much, and I cannot wait to see you all in the next one.